he talks about jars of clay in this verse, right? But then he also says that there's treasure in these jars of clay. We know that the jars of clay are us, but what is the treasure that Paul is talking about in this verse? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to go back to 2 Corinthians, late in chapter 3, and I'm not going to put the reference up there, but you can put that in your notes and go back and read that later. Later in chapter 3, he talks about Exodus chapter 34. He alludes to it. Because in Exodus chapter 34, it's where we find Moses in the desert with the Israelites. He had been on the mountain of God, with God, Mount Sinai, for 40 days and for 40 nights. He came down that mountain, and because he had spent so much time in the presence of God, face to face in the presence of God, when he came down that mountain, he was actually physically glowing. His face was glowing. In fact, his face was glowing so bright that the Israelites couldn't look him full in the face. Just a side note, if you spend time in God's presence, you're going to be different. It's going to change you, right? But his face was so bright that the Israelites made him wear a veil over his face because they couldn't look in his face. And the interesting thing is, as he spent time away from the presence of God, that light started to dim and to dim and to dim and to dim, kind of like a battery that's losing its charge. But when he would go to meet with God in what was called the tent of meeting, it was where him and God met together face to face. When he would come out of that tent, it was like he was recharged again and his face would be glowing and you have to put the veil back over his face. So that's what he's talking about in 2 Corinthians chapter 3. And then he goes on to say in 2 Corinthians 4:7, he talks about this treasure that we have. And the treasure that he's alluding to is that light that shone off of Moses' face. And that light was the glory of God. And so he says, we have this treasure, we have this glory of God, this light, and we have it in jars of clay, which again is us, right?